Hi, everybody. Welcome to Patrick's Scale Studio. My name's Patrick. I'll be your host. So, where we left off in video one was taking care of all the mold seams. As part of the molding process, you get mold seams in small steps. It's just the nature of the beast. So, we got those sanded out. This is just as smooth as baby skin now. There's no more mold seams, there's no more steps that I can feel with my fingernail. We also glued on the sonar bulge there on the bow. This is now set for 24 hours. It is cemented firmly in place. It's not likely to come off ever unless we really force the issue. No problems there at all. Fit was nice. Everything looked really good. But again, just the nature of the beast here with modeling, there is going to be a seam that we have to deal with. This right here, in fact, even entails a tiny little gap. You can see it's on both sides. This side I've already actually started sanding away a little bit just to see if there is any kind of a step there or if it was only just a gap and a small seam that we needed to fill. I'll be doing the same thing here with you on camera today, just to show you how I went about doing that. So, in order to display this properly, or display it at all, I'm going to also want to get some holes drilled and get this prepared for mounting. So after I've got it painted, everything's finished, ready to go. I've already got what I need in there just to be able to mount this screw up from the bottom of the piece of wood that it's going to be mounting to and be done with it without scratching up the paint and without messing with the piece of wood that I'm eventually going to be using. While we're on the subject of mounting, I want to go ahead and get something out of the way real quick. You don't need to do this with your kit. If you the kit comes with its very own base, and it's just 3 pieces. This is all one piece, and then there's 2 gray pieces that you glue on at either end. They're keyed, so you can't misalign them. And then the hull just sits like that. And it actually sits well. There's not a lot of wiggle room or anything like that. It's not going to go anywhere. And it certainly is a lot more than I've seen included in other large scale ship kits. However, I built ships in the past, and I prefer the look of a nice chunk of wood beneath them, especially the little pedestals. I just think it looks nice, and it really kind of adds to the character of the finished piece. So I will not be using this, but if this is within your skill set, or you can dress this up, or you even like the way it looks as is, absolutely, it's your model, your choice. I encourage you to do what makes you happy. So in order to do the 2 things that I wanted to do today, I'll go ahead and talk about my materials and my tools. When I've got the hole, of course, I've got the chunk of wood here that I'm going to mount it on temporarily until I get a nice finished piece of wood, which we will only mount to at the very, very end, so I don't risk damaging that piece of wood. I've also got a couple of pieces of really dense hard foam that I can put down there after I get the holes drilled through. That'll hold this in place. The nice thing about the foam is I don't have to worry about damaging anything if this gets to be a touch loose or it rocks a little bit. No problems there. Temporary wood, foam blocks. These are the actual brass pedestals I ordered from Amazon. They're very easy to find. You just look for brass pedestals for ships, model ships. They're really nice. They're a heavy chunk of brass. It's all machined, very well polished. And at the very end, when I'm ready to use these, I will wipe them down, polish them back out again, make sure I have no fingerprints, then use some rubber gloves in order to handle them and put them in place so I can avoid smudging them with fingerprints. These are the screws that I'll be using throughout, but they are the ones that came with those brass pedestals. Comes with that. Comes with the screw. It comes with a lock washer nut combination, and then comes with another washer. As far as the tools go, I'll be using a ruler. using a square, sanding sponges, pencil, varying sizes of regular twist drill bits, a paddle bit or spade bit, depending on where you live. That's what it's called. X-Acto knife, pair of nippers, Tamiya extra thin cement, digital caliper, a cordless drill, a grill lighter, and some spare pieces of modeling sprue, preferably from the same company that the kit's manufactured from, so the plastic matches. In this case, this is a Trumpeter M1A1 Abrams tank kit that I've got a lot of pieces that I'm absolutely not going to use any longer. So I've got plenty of runs of sprue that I can melt and stretch, and I can use that to fill in the gaps and the seams at the front of the hole. And I'm choosing to go that route, again, just because the plastic is going to make a much nicer filler than putty or any kind of regular filling putty or filling paste or anything like that. The plastic itself is actually going to be much better. There's actually a small notch here where the piece is met. And it's just natural. It happens. And if I put putty or something in there, good chance it won't stick properly. It'll flake off, fall out. So if I use stretch sprue, I'll melt it in with the cement, and it'll fuse this into more of a one-piece assembly, and it'll be plastic, so that won't just fall and break out. So in order to prepare for that, I'm going to have to drill holes through here. I'm going to have to drill holes through this dense foam, and I'm going to have to drill holes through a block of wood. In preparing for that, I've already marked a center line down my piece of wood. It's 3.5 inches wide, so 1.25 inch. Mark there, straight line down. The kit itself is 30.25 inch long, so that divides almost perfectly into threes. Just with 10 1/8, 10 1/8, and a 10 in the middle. So the 10 in the middle is where we'll drill the holes. There'll be 10 inches in the middle with 10 1/8, 10 1/8 there, and just the two holes will line up with two 10-inch marks here. And that's where the screws will come up through the foam and then through the bottom of the hole, and I'll be able to mount it in place. As I said, I've already gone ahead and marked these out just because this is 3.5. Divided that into 1 3/4, 10 inches here with roughly 6 inches on each side. Since this is only temporary, this doesn't have to be exact, except for that 10 inch and that 10 inch, right? Those two marks have to be 10 inches apart. I don't want the screws going like this or like this. Now, in order to figure out what size drill bits I needed, this is where the digital calipers come in. Go ahead and turn this on. As you can see, I've got this set to inches in fractions. So one, I can tell how large of a hole I need to make in all the media for this to pass all the way through. Ends up with 15/64. That is just a hair smaller than 1/4 inch. Now, I have to have varying sizes of drill bits because if I attack this immediately with a 1/4 inch, it's going to tear the plastic apart. It's just going to be an awful mess. It'll be a very jagged hole in the plastic. It'll do fine in the wood, but it'll tear the plastic apart. So we'd start with a small hole, a medium-sized hole, and then a larger hole. All right, the paddle bit comes into place here on our piece of wood. If I don't countersink this, then on the bottom, that is going to stand proud. And when I sit this down, it'll rock back and forth on that head, which means I have to countersink it in so that the wood actually sits flat. In order to do that, I'll need the paddle bit or spade bit. So again, trusty calipers. All right, let's find the fattest part of this. And that gives us 59 1/28, which is just about a 1/2 inch. That's just a touch smaller than a 1/2 inch. So that is why I've selected the 1/2 inch paddle bit. I've already got my holes marked on my wood. I've got my drill bits. So I'm going to go ahead and proceed to the garage with the drill bits, the drill, and get these drilled out and keep the sawdust out there. So I'll be back in a couple of minutes. Thanks for standing by. Okay, I'm back. I used the paddle bit and the 1/4 inch bit to drill through. I drilled all the way through. Made 2 1/4 inch holes. So you can see this passes cleanly through those. Also countersunk just so that this would fall all the way through. When this sits down, it won't rock on there. So please note when you've got the paddle bit, if you are unfamiliar with how they work and woodworking in general, you don't want to take the paddle bit and drill all the way through. The idea is to make a small hole all the way through that'll accommodate the shank of the screw, and then just a larger hole that only goes partially way through, just to act as a stop on the screw head. Now that that's complete, go ahead and push these through. As you see, I'm keeping the washers there as well. Now they're through. I'm going to go ahead and take these blocks of foam, which I also drilled the 1/4 inch hole through, and sink them down over top of those right there. That does 2 things for right now for us. 1, it holds those screws in place. They won't fall back through. And then 2, also, now we've got our screws in place there. So we can go ahead and measure out and then drill out the holes that go into the hole so we can demonstrate how this will mount down. I'm going to put this aside. I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, so the next part of this here is going to be, we want to measure out where the holes are going to go on the bow of the ship. As I mentioned earlier, 30 1/4 inches long. That's going to be from there to there, the very furthest points that this ship will get to. With that said, we can divide that into 3 parts or 3 sections, and where those 3 sections hit on each other is going to give us 2 distinct points, and those 2 distinct points will be where we drill through, and they should be 10 inches apart, and that's going to make the ship look very balanced in that there's going to be the same distance from each end of the ship to the brass pedestals. With 30 1/4, I want 10 inches there, 10 1/8 here, 10 1/8 there. This is not just a square chunk of wood. So how did I get that? How did I get this first mark here that I'm starting out with? That's where this comes in handy. I set this to 10 1/8 right there on my square. And then I can come here, and as long as I've got this propped up so this isn't hitting my working surface, I can make sure that this is properly flat against the bottom of the hull, and that this back part here is touching the back of the hull. After that, I've got it held. I can take a pencil and I come along here and put my very first mark. So that right there is the hardest part of measuring this out on the hull. That ugly seam line that we had earlier that we sanded away was really handy at first for telling us where the exact center of the hole is. However, we still have some indicators here where the center of the hole is. Those sprue nibs where the plastic was pushed into this mold right here, those right there are going to give us a wonderful indicator of where the center line is, because they matched up with the mold seam. This is where the mold halves squished together, and those were channels in the mold halves that allowed the plastic to come through. So I can actually take a pencil and I can connect the dots for our center line. This is a very nice ruler. It's got a cork backing to it, so it doesn't slip on this plastic easily if I hold it firmly in place. So I've got my center line marked. I've got 10 and 1/8 inch from the stern marked. So now all I have to do is find 10 inches from that point. Okay, so I've got that point and that point. I'm going to go ahead and double check again. You see something I'm doing incorrectly, feel free to point it out in the comments, or if you have a better way of doing this, again, feel free to point it out. But just double checking, that looks like 10 inches. I can also double check that against the screws on this and see if they roughly line up. And look at that, they do. I'm going to go ahead and put this back aside. I'm going to go ahead and put away my square. If this falls off of a heavy surface, or if it falls off of a surface and hits a hard floor or a hard surface, it can bend and then damage its usefulness. So we want to make sure that that is out of the way. So another thing I'm going to make sure I'm doing here is using the increasing sizes of drill bits. I'm going to start with a small, which I've already got loaded up in my drill. I'm going to go ahead and do this off camera as well. I'll be right back. Thanks. Okay, those holes have been drilled out using the smallest drill bit that I showed up front. As we can see, we've got two 10-inch apart holes. They're beautiful. One thing I want to show or stress when you're drilling through plastic, because it's plastic, you want to use a variable speed drill and you want to use a very low speed. High speed in your drill will result in the plastic melting rather than it just cutting cleanly and smoothly. You don't want your plastic to melt. It'll distort the area around it as well as a additional benefit to that process. So use a very slow speed setting on your drill or do it manually. And you want to do that, make sure you do it that way all the way up through each size of drill bit that you use. So I've got the next one loaded up. I'm going to go ahead and take care of that now off camera. I got that next size of holes drilled through those same holes, so they're a little bit bigger now. Even with as slow as I was drilling, because it's plastic, the drills still managed to tear out chunks of plastic with it. They just bite so fast in the plastic because it's so soft compared to them, and that's the result. So because of that, I'm going to take a little bit of an extra precaution, and with the very last size, which is the 1/4 inch, I'm going to drill from the inside out. All right, it should result in cleaner holes on this side and yuckier holes on this side right here, which will eventually be covered up anyway, so won't be a worry. I'm going to go ahead and do that off camera. I'll be right back. Alrighty, so that worked out very well. I drilled from the inside. And the resulting holes on the other side were a lot cleaner. There's still a little bit of that tear out mess from this one here, and that's okay though. For the most part, we have a look at one of our brass pedestals. And that'll cleanly cover that up. That will not be a problem. So now that my holes are drilled, also, by the way, notice in video 1 I mentioned protecting that tip. That's how I do it. A little bit of foam. This is actual packing foam from this model kit itself that was in place over top of this whole piece. So I cut out just that little portion of that entire piece and was able to tape it in place there. So now this can Yep, this can bump into things. I don't have to worry about that little piece of the hull breaking off. That is now covered. So just to double check what we've done, voila. So what this will allow me to do is, after I get this painted, red, black stripe, light gray, after I get this painted, I can put it in place and not have to worry about anything breaking. These are also nice in that they can go like that. So once I add the bilge keels, these won't interfere with where those are. But there we go. And then after I screw these down like this, this won't go anywhere. Turn it upside down. I can work on anything like this. If I've got a piece up here and hanging down, I can hold to the side. I can work on that easily. But for the most part, it's just nice in that now I've got somewhere to sit this down when I want to get it out of the way to work on something else that's not going to go onto the project immediately. I can move this out of the way and not have to worry about scratching up any of the paint on the bottom, any of the finish, any of the other parts. I can just move this as one unit of wood in the hole, and it's done and over with. Now, later on, either on this video or our next video, I will be gluing those nuts into place inside the hull. So they will be a permanent fixture. And then in order to get these screws to go up through there, I'll just have to use a Phillips head screwdriver and screw them up into where those nuts are nestled inside the hull. I'm going to put this out of the way again. And the other concern for this video was taking care of this right here. Sanding sponge, 400 grit, to me a sanding sponge. Did fine work of bringing this down. There's no step, just a slight seam, very, very slight seam, very slight gap. We'll have to fill. So first off, we'll go ahead and get this other side sanded so that it matches what that looks like. And just like last time, this will go into full speed ahead with a little bit of background music, so you're not watching me do this for a half hour. One of the things I forgot to bring up before I started is there's a way you can tell if there's a step, and that's usually if when you start sanding, you see both pieces starting to get sand marks evenly. It's hard to see in plastic like this though, so one thing you can do is you can take a marker, don't worry, this will sand out, but just a nice magic marker. So one, I can already feel that there's a little bit of a step there. A step or a significant gap. Let that dry for a minute. And then as you sand, if you start to see it going unevenly, it's sanding one side more than the other, that means there's a step. If both sides are sanding away evenly, the same distance away from the seam, then the pieces are even. It's just a small gap. Steps are a little bit more of a challenge to take care of, so when we see what we're dealing with, we'll act accordingly. I'm pretty happy with that. The sanding already put most of the work behind us for making this look like it's one piece rather than several pieces. There's still just the slightest gap, but there's no step now at this point. Just slight gap, slight seam that we want to fill. And we'll use stretched sprue and my extra thin to get that diffused into one seamless piece of plastic. So in order to make stretched sprue, if you haven't done it before, it's very easy to do. Remember your grill lighter or candle lighter. And then you find an unsuspecting victim. In this case, this is a piece of sprue from an M1A1 kit by Trumpeter, which is great because it's the same piece of plastic as this. Exact same piece of plastic. I'm wondering what's going to happen to that barrel. It will probably get tossed in the trash because I already got the proper barrel out of the kit that I wanted. That barrel I won't be using. All right, so now that I've got our unsuspecting victim of our fire attack, grill lighter, what you want to do is hold it underneath your piece of sprue. It will get black. Don't worry. That is all part of the process. What we're watching for is that bend. It might even catch on fire. Still going. It's starting to stretch on its own. So now we can just take this and slowly pull it apart. And that right there, for most of us, is probably a year's worth of stretched sprue. That is plenty of stretched sprue to work with. It's very nice, very bendable, very versatile. It even has varying thicknesses along its length. This right here is as thin as hair. Up here, it's quite thick. So now that we've got this, I'm going to clean up my workbench. I'll be right back. Okay, with stretched sprue, there's many different ways. Everyone does it a little bit differently, but we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to cut off a piece of this that is longer than what I actually need. And I'm going to do that so I can trim off anything I don't need at the end after it's stuck down. So right there is more than enough to get this half. Great. So where do I go from here? Take this. And holding it in place. Now, mind you, you have to be ultra careful here. So sometimes it might even be in your best interest to take a little bit of your extra thin and dab it on there. If I held that in place while I was filming this on camera, the worst thing would happen. That extra thin cement would wick underneath where I was holding this down all the way to where my finger was. Wick underneath my finger, and then I'd have a great big plastic fingerprint. So as it is, that right there is just enough. Now it's just enough drying time to get this to sit down on its own. Now it's kind of stuck there. Just another little dab on top will seal the deal for it. I'm gonna let that go off for a few seconds. One thing I know it's not going to do is cooperate, so we already have that there. Don't tape it down prior to adding the glue because it will wick underneath the tape as well, and then you'll have a great big preserved in plastic imprint of tape. Put down tape on this after you've already applied glue and you've already put the pieces together. For the most part, the wicking action takes place like that immediately. So after you've put the glue down, put your piece down, put a little bit more glue down, give it a couple seconds, then tape it in place. You won't have to worry about the glue wicking into that. And just a little bit of, to me, extra thin on its own will not ruin the project. It's only when it wicks under something like your fingers or a piece of tape, and then you've got a much bigger problem to deal with. I'm going to continue going here. There we go. All right, you can see I'm following that seam. When I put more glue on this, it's going to end up, again, fusing that stretch sprue into the seam, into that gap, and it's going to make it a seamless piece of plastic. That's our end goal. Continue. All right, go ahead and put this in place. There we go. All right, we are on the home stretch here. Perfect. And stretch sprue now is in the seam. Now that we've got it where we want it, go over this again. Oop, almost forgot. That comes off. Remember what I said, it'll wick under the tape. Do not want that to happen. All right, so now more of this wonderful solvent adhesive right there on the stretch sprue. That'll force this to melt and descend into that seam, into that slight gap. If we're lucky, we do this one time to make for one smooth, seamless piece of plastic after we get done sanding this. I don't know if you can see that. You can see the glue, the shiny, and then the stretch sprue, the extra of which is hanging out right here. On the other side, there's the extra hanging out right there. The glue evaporates and sits off so quickly that it's dry to the touch for the most part right away. You can do this for multiple applications to make this hair-like thin plastic as soft as you want to get it to flow into that seam, that gap, and fill it up. I'm going to go ahead and take care of the other side of this off camera so I can adjust this a little bit better and clean up any other small little nuances that I see along the way. I'll be back in a minute. Okay, I'm back. Gone ahead and gotten stretch sprue attached to both sides. trimmed up a little bit on the back end. I'm going to wait to trim it up there until that hardens up a little bit more. It's real super soft right now from the solvent in that cement, but it's done on both sides. And probably over the next half hour, I will continue to douse it with more and more extra thin cement. And then after that, I have to give it about 24 hours to fully cure before I start sanding it. If I start sanding it too early, the plastic might still be kind of soft, kind of squishy, and might start pulling away from this piece right here. The sprue might start pulling away, and that might make even a much bigger mess to have to worry about and deal with. So I got to wait 24 hours for that to fully cure. I'm going to go ahead and sand it out. 400, 600, 1000. So that should look seamless by the next video. Additionally, I'm going to go ahead and conquer this top area here. This is just a pretty quick seam where the two parts went together. There's no step or anything like that. It's just a seam. All I have to do is sand it out. So by next video, this should look a lot more like just one seamless piece of plastic on both sides. We shouldn't see the notch up front. We won't see this seam line here. And we'll be ready to move on to the next order of business with this hull. And it's probably going to be attaching the bilge keels, the propeller shafts and their mounts, and then start looking at the propellers themselves, which probably won't go on until very last because they're going to be a bronze kind of copperish color anyway. But we could start looking at those and see how Trumpeter has the instructions set up for that. After we get all of that prepared and taken care of, then we can look into priming this and getting it painted. Once it's primed and painted, we'll be able to flip it over and start working on the deck and all the fun stuff. If there's anything you would like to see in the meantime, please feel free to let me know in the comments what that is. If I'm doing something wrong or you can think of a better way also, I'm always open to constructive criticism. So please let me know. And something I lightly touched on last video was concerning any kind of weld details around where the plates and the hunks of this hull would have gone together. So I did a little bit of math, and I don't think I'll be doing it because the math that I performed was at the scale of 1/200, a 6-foot sailor is going to be less than 3/8 inch tall. And that is 3/8 on my digital caliper. There's my finger. So if they're 3/8 inch tall, you can imagine how small their hands are, and then in relation to the size of a normal person's hand, what a weld bead should look like. That would be almost completely invisible on this. And I believe that would be more work than it's worth. If I put anything on there to simulate that, I think it would be grossly out of scale. Even if you look at pictures of this that are from a distance, you don't see any of the seam lines. You don't see anything at all. For the most part, you might see a little bit of oil canning depending on the angle of the sun and how close you are. But even at a distance, you're not even seeing the oil canning. And the period at which I'm depicting this ship is in the 90s. It's new. It's not going to have a lot of oil canning effect. So I'm going to say no on the oil canning effect, and I'm going to say no on any kind of weld beads or anything like this. You just would not see them unless you are right up on top of the real thing in person. Otherwise, it's just wasted effort. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I think we're at the 45-minute mark, which is probably longer than you want to sit here for. If you are still here, I thank you very much for watching and hope to see you next time.